Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 6th season, we are looking at the Avengers. I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And I'm Pete Wright. And you know, I rabbited once, and it didn't look anything like this.
Today we're talking about minute 89, which begins with Fury finding Coulson dying and ends with Natasha hearing the news about Coulson. Back on the show, we have Curtis Findlay from the Epic Marvel Podcast. Hello, Curtis.
Hello. And boy, this is a good episode to talk about. I'm glad I was on for this minute.
Absolutely. Before we jump into everything going on with Coulson, last chance to chat about Loki. We mentioned yesterday that at the very beginning of this minute, we see as Loki's flying away, he's got that mischievous smile on his face. What do you think of Tom Hiddleston and Loki in this film, Curtis?
He's fantastic. He's definitely one of the highlights. I like him in the first movie leading up to this as well, so it was great to see him as the antagonist here. I wasn't sure if he would be able to cut it against all of the Avengers because, you know, it's not like he's a powerhouse or anything, but they really wrote him well with his tactical mind and his just mischievous nature. And this little smile that you get are these little subtle things that Tom Hiddleston does all throughout. Anytime he appears, he's a character. He's a minimalist actor, and he is fantastic at it.
I think he does a great job here. It is interesting, and obviously, you know, Loki figures prominently in the Avengers comics, so it makes sense that they kind of pick him to play their first villain. But
especially, he is the first villain in Avengers #1.
Right. Yeah, exactly. What do you think of his character, the way that his character changes over the course of the franchise as he kind of becomes, I guess it's fair to say likable. He becomes somebody that is not necessarily a hero, but certainly, you know, is somebody that we kind of root for and eventually is getting his own TV series. I mean, how does that shift in his character play for you?
That is 100% the strength of Tom Hiddleston, and the fact that he is a great actor and that he is a very personable guy, always there for his fans. And when the fans want more of that, then you got to give it to them. Marvel has a history of taking their very popular villain characters and turning them into heroes because they've just become so popular. Venom being the #1 example of that. He started out as a Spider-Man villain, and when he became super popular, they wanted to give him their own series, but Marvel's like, you know what? We can't really give a villain their own series and glorify what they're trying to do, so we need to turn them into an anti-hero. And so that's what they did with there.
And make him funny.
Venom never actually went very funny. That was a thing for the movies.
That's a movie
thing.
Didn't
really play very well, in my opinion. But that's a whole other conversation. Whenever you get to the Venom Marvel Movie Minute episodes, you let me know.
Curtis, please don't hold your breath for that. Please.
But yeah, I mean, Deadpool is another example of that type of a character. And I think Loki went through the transformation specifically because Tom Hiddleston is such a great person. Just not even his character, but he himself is a great person. They want to give him more spotlight. Let's turn him into a hero. And then the comic books kind of followed suit with that.
I mean, it makes sense. And in the scope of villains who become somewhat heroes because there are villains worse than them, I mean, I suppose that's kind of how a lot of these work, right? I mean, in the case, certainly with Venom, well, he's kind of a bad character. He eats people and stuff, but Carnage is much worse. So we like Venom because he's better. And I mean, that's certainly the case with Loki here. He's a mischief as far as like what he does. Obviously, you know, kills Coulson, which we're certainly going to talk about here. And so there's a lot of reasons to not like the character, but Thanos is so much worse. So, you know, we still like Loki a little bit because he and Thor, they have so much fun together, you know, so it's interesting the way that they always play that.
Well, and they do it really well. I mean, Marvel is nothing if not heroic relativists, right? Like, shall we bring up Punisher? That's
Sure.
like so much of these characters are more interesting in their complexities as they deal with their own, struggles with good and evil, whether they do it with funny or they do it with solemnity. And I think this is one of those sequences where a character that we end up ultimately loving and giving an entire series to does a bad thing to another character that is arguably beloved in the MCU. And I'm curious your takes on Coulson's, like, the degree of mourning for the loss of Coulson in this movie. And I ask that question with no disrespect to Clark Gregg and his performance as Coulson. I really do like this character. And he's also like our principal SHIELD agent. Everybody seems really sad when a lot of other people presumably died too. What makes this one different?
I would have to say that this is another example of the actor being the primary catalyst to all of this. There wasn't a whole lot of time between Iron Man and Avengers, but in that amount of time, Clark Gregg went from nobody to like super popular at the comic conventions and everything like that. Like, fans loved him as a person because he is just such a great person. So when we see the loss of this character, I think we're not actually mourning the loss of Coulson. It's more, oh man, Clark Gregg is being written out of this franchise that we're so attached to.
Yeah, I think that's a really astute point.
And it certainly is something that they've very purposefully, we on this show, Curtis, we refer to the writer-director as Tig Notaro because of the whole replacement of an actor with issues on the set of Army of the Dead with Tig Notaro, which, so we jokingly refer to him as Tig Notaro here. But the writer-director, as Tig Notaro was crafting this script with Zach Penn, there's clearly an element of, let's put as many moments in here every chance we get with Coulson to make the audience, he is the perfect audience surrogate, right? We've got moments where he's fanboying with Captain America. We've got moments where he's hanging out with Tony and Pepper. Like, he always seems to be in with all of these people who are so cool, and we all like them. They're all superheroes. And so giving him these moments where he has these awkward conversations or he's just kind of a fan, and it makes him so relatable as somebody for us to kind of connect with. And I think that's one of the perfect elements of the way that they chose to really expand on him as a character from this film. Because, I mean, we'd seen him in the previous films off and on, but never in as prominent a role as he has here. And so getting a chance to really connect with this guy was very smart. And I will say, in Tig's projects, and specifically, I always think of Serenity as the follow-up to Firefly. There is this element of writing a character that the audience loves and just has such a connection with, suddenly getting killed. And it gives the audience like such a jolt because it forces you to like accept that somebody that you know and love and really have connected with over all this time has now died. It increases the stakes because you get this sense of the story, like suddenly like, well, now nobody's safe because I don't know what's going to happen anymore. The whole world's falling down around me because Coulson just died. It's like that sort of moment. And I think, it's one of those moments that in the scope of telling a story, I suppose you can look at it like, it's a little unfair for the director to do that, or the writer to kind of do that as they're putting a story together. But at the same time, it's like, that's how you tell good stories. You give characters things you want, and then you have to break their hearts at some point. And this is that moment. And it's heartbreaking, but it's effective.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree with that. And I think it's also a thing that he's really good at and has been really good at since, Buffy, right? Which was the whole idea of creating a catalog of incredibly beloved characters and setting the table in such a way that you just never know who is at risk next, right? You just never know. And I think he actually killed Buffy twice, right? Like, and brought her back, which increases the uncertainty around which characters are safe and which characters are not. So I think it's a useful narrative tool, and I don't think it's used irresponsibly. I do think it's used as a way to build up the intensity around, you know, the situation here, and to bring the team together through grief. You know, that it's great. That's fine. I'm here for it. And again, I do love Clark Gregg. I do love Clark Gregg.
Yeah. And he was the thing that I'm sure you've mentioned this before. Of course, Coulson is the thread through Phase 1. We meet him, I guess it's not in the first couple of movies. We meet him in Iron Man 2, right? Or is it in Iron Man 1?
No, we meet him in Iron Man.
Yeah. Right from the very beginning. Through the course of these movies unfolding, he is the one consistent character through all of them. And then we also got those little short films that included him as well. And it's like, that's really, really neat to see. No other phase in Marvel has that thread. And I'm not as keen on this current phase that we're in, Phase 4 or Phase 5 or whatever we're in now, because we don't have that connective tissue. It was really, really important for establishing the universe at the very beginning, and taking that away is like, where are we going next? What's going to happen?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There is an element that I do wonder, and I don't know. I'm curious both of your takes on this. I never finished watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., as Pete knows, but I do wonder, the nature of bringing him back for that show, does that diminish the weight of this? Because, and I mean, obviously it happened a few times in Buffy, as you just said, Pete, when suddenly your characters can be killed off, but then just written back, and there's, you know, I'm sure we'll come up with a reason. Does that end up diminishing the weight of character loss?
Yes, it always does. It doesn't matter what it is. It always will. The fact that they sort of divorced Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. from the rest of the MCU, I think, helped that. They never mentioned Coulson ever again in the movies, so that weight still continues if you never watch the show. Also, spoiler alert, Coulson dies a few times in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And they keep bringing him back.
I was just going to say... They keep bringing it back, yeah. But you know, there's something about, like, and this is to your point again, Curtis, which is this idea that it would have been miserable had Clark Gregg not lived up to the performance of Coulson. Like, I loved Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it's a cognitive twist when you turn it on and realize, okay, they're promoting a show with this character who I saw die and was supposed to care because everybody grieved, and now we're moving on and I have to be excited about that. But once I got over that, he's really great, and I love all of his exchanges with the entire team on that show, and I think it was written well. So it does damage the long-term sort of emotional continuity of Coulson as a character. You know, would Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. been the same had it been not Coulson at the head of it? You know, probably, frankly. They probably would have been able to do more with it had it not been Coulson. But Clark Gregg had the charisma to carry it.
Definitely, yep.
Well, yeah, I mean, he is a very charismatic actor. I definitely agree with that. It is just one of those things where in the scope of storytelling, when suddenly that happens, it's like, because, I mean, to a certain extent, that's an interesting element that potentially affected people's opinions of wanting to see more of Tom Hiddleston, because it's like they love Loki, but, you know, it's like, well, do we want to continue a story thread with a character who killed one of our most beloved characters that we had created for this thing? And like, I can see them struggling with how can we make people still like Loki down the road? And then suddenly it's like, well, you know what? But Phil's alive now, so Loki didn't really kill him, so it's kind of okay. And so there's an element there also where it's like, you know, in the scope of all of this, it kind of makes Loki a little less unlikable too. So it's interesting, the choices that they made with that. But I think when you're watching this film and none of that stuff had happened back in 2012, like, this is all we have, and and Phil Coulson gets killed right here. He'd been stabbed a few minutes ago, but this is where he dies. It's like, I mean, it hit. I think it was very effective.
Yeah.
Out of all of the characters in this movie, all of the main cast in this movie, Coulson is the only one who doesn't exist in the comics, or didn't at the time.
Right.
And so all of these characters have sort of built-in histories that the comics are, sort of following here and there. The main ones being deaths would be one of the high points. Like we saw that with Jane Foster's character, her cancer story, although it ends differently in the comic books, that is still kind of a benchmark. And so Coulson being a character that doesn't have any history, I think he's the logical choice to become the martyr.
Well, okay, so now this is another interesting thing to discuss, because he literally becomes a martyr to the point where he's almost saying that in the script, and I wonder
absolutely.
how the two of you feel about that, because I mean, he says it's okay, this was never going to work if they didn't have something to, and then he dies. But it's like, I mean, he's saying what the writer's intentions are. Is that like way too obvious? Of all of this, that's the thing that I struggle with actually quite a bit.
I think this shows his commitment to his job, to world security, because he's saying it's okay if I'm dying because this is going to be the thing that saves the world.
At least he hopes.
He hopes so.
And if there was ever a character, though, to be able to play that message, it's probably Coulson.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he is so on his sleeve authentic. Like, there is nothing about him that feels sort of subversive, even as a spy, right? Like, he is, the way his sort of interpersonal relationships are, he can't help but speak truth to his friends. Like, he's so awkward. He's so, his fanboying is fantastic. Like, this seems like the perfect sacrifice that this character would make for Captain America and Iron Man. Yeah. And this is what he would do. I believe it.
He's like, I get to play a role in the Avengers origin story? Yes, please sign me up.
Right. Maybe I'll get a playing card one day.
Yeah.
Well, essentially, he is Steve Rogers throwing himself on the grenade who never gets the super soldier serum, right? And it is an actual grenade. That's basically what we're getting with Coulson.
Wow,
right?
Yeah. That's great. That's really great.
That is so dark, Andy. God.
I'm just saying. That's exactly what they're giving us.
He never gets the serum, and it is a grenade. That's what he's doing right now, is the darkest thing you've ever said on this show, maybe.
Well, you got to get blood on the playing card somehow. Sorry.
I just have to say, as an aside, you just took my last line of this episode. Now I have to come up with something completely different.
Talk to Monty Python. I'm sure they can help. Now, here's a question for you. Have either of you ever used the verb rabbited or to rabbit?
Just now, a few minutes ago, I just did. It's the first time. I regret it.
It took me so long.
What does it even mean in this context?
Right. It took me so long to figure out what he was saying. I'm like, what is he saying? And even, the script that I use, sometimes I question, I'm like, is this an actual script or did somebody just transcribe this? Because sometimes I'm like, I think that they have typos all over this thing that I don't think that the writer intended. And so, because basically what I think he says is the god rabbited.
I thought he said the guy rabbited.
It could be the guy, but I thought it was the god because he's talking about Loki. But it could be the guy rabbited. Either way, it's just such a weird thing to say. And I just like, as I finally figured out what he's saying, I'm like, is this something somebody would ever use, especially when they're dying? Like, like it felt like such a written line.
It feels really military, and it is. I mean, it is. Yeah. And it that's what it sounds like to me. It feels like a thing that you might say if you were, or may, I don't know, if you were on a search for somebody, like if you're on a hard target search. This feels like a very much that kind of a thing. It is. I mean, it's in the dictionary to rabbit as a verb.
What does it mean?
to move quickly or run away. So, it works. But I've just never heard it used that way. So,
I
So okay,
I question.
Here's another definition. It's the activity of hunting rabbits. So here, go with me on this one. Way back in minute 74, I think it was 74, 75, when they were talking about Loki's motivation about going in here, was he going in to kill someone, to kill Coulson? Was that one of his goals? Was he hunting a rabbit?
Oh, he rabbited, but then wouldn't it have had to have an object? He rabbited me.
Yeah. I got
well,
rabbited.
He's dying. He doesn't have enough energy to get that word out.
I've just been rabbited.
Now I just want Loki talking like Elmer Fudd.
Yeah.
Be very, very quiet. Oh, okay. Nice.
It is a strange line for sure. It feels written. It feels like the writer going, "Oh, I didn't know that was a word. This would be fun to throw in somewhere," and they put it in here. And I mean, it's clever. It is interesting. It certainly makes you go, oh, "Okay, there's that's something that Coulson says." I guess even when he's dying, he's going to talk about being the guy or the god rabbited. It's a strange little thing.
And if you think about the way Buffy was written, there are all these cute catchphrases and odd lingo and stuff many. That, this actually falls into that kind of category.
Does it really? Interesting.
And that's part of the gimmick in how, and I think that spawned a lot of the same kind of writing at the time, which was, let's take characters who would never in a million years speak this way and give them language that makes them sound like they are sort of preternaturally like gifted with words. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And that's what we like about them. That's like Buffy, it's Dawson's Creek, it's like all of those sort of teens that speak like adults kind of things. And so that fits.
Yeah, it is interesting.
This being the very last meeting between Nick Fury and Coulson, have you talked at all about their comic book characters at all, counterparts?
Not specifically. Did you have something in mind you wanted to talk about?
Well, I just wanted to note that, like I said, Coulson never existed in the comic books. But one of the things that happens a lot in the comics these days is that the comics try to retrofit what's happening in the MCU into the comics to try and get that corporate synergy going so that they can bring in some new readers. One of the biggest changes is the fact that Nick Fury is African American, which in the comics, he's Caucasian.
But that happened before the movies, right? That was in the Ultimate line,
In the Ultimate line, it happened in the movies, but in the regular 616 Marvel Universe, it happened in 2012. The Coulson's first appearance is in a comic called Battle Scars #6 in 2012. And that is a miniseries that was specifically created to introduce the African-American Nick Fury into the 616 universe. And it's not the same as the Ultimate Universe Nick Fury. It's this guy named Marcus Johnson. And he is a SHIELD agent and gets kidnapped and tortured. He's African American. He's got an African American mother, and in the process, he loses his eye through the torture. And then at the very end, he finds out through a series of events that he's actually Nick Fury's son. He's Nick Fury Jr. He's actually half black, half white. And the other Nick Fury, the guy from World War II, the Caucasian guy, he's gone. He's written out of the picture. He's dead. Technically not dead, but he's dead. And this new Nick Fury Jr. becomes the head of SHIELD. So they did this weird thing to create this story to make it more like the movies. And through this story, Marcus Johnson has a partner who his nickname is Cheese. And so he just calls him Cheese through this entire thing. And then once Marcus Johnson finds out that he's actually Nick Fury Jr., he mentions Cheese by his real name, Phil Coulson. And so they now brought both of these guys into the comics in the most ridiculous way.
That's officially ridiculous.
Yeah.
Was this, I mean, just introducing him as an African American Nick Fury. This was at the same time where they introduced him as Samuel L. Jackson derived Nick Fury, right? Or was that in the Ultimate?
That was the Ultimate story.
Okay.
That was 10 years before that, and that they definitely. But that version of the character was really popular, and that's what influenced the MCU version of the character, also because they wanted more diversity in their cast.
Yeah, sure.
But then, they wanted to have the actual Nick Fury in the 616 Marvel Universe to be that way too, so they did a big song and dance to make that happen.
Jeez is Coulson.
Yeah.
Unreal.
I'm trying to remember, like, if that was ever mentioned as a nickname, like in Captain Marvel, between the two of them. Does cheese ever come up?
I don't know. I don't recall.
That makes me laugh. Cheese.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so funny. Well, speaking of, let's talk a little bit. So we get to see a few reactions to Coulson dying here. First of all, is Nick Fury. So, I mean, how does this play for you, knowing that there is this history from at least 1995, if not a little bit before, all the way up until this particular moment? I mean, how does it play watching Samuel L. Jackson emote with this moment of the passing of his friend?
He's the type of character that I don't expect him to like do a Darth Vader no or anything like that. But so it was a nice solemn moment. But then again, he's director of S.H.I.E.L.D., so he snaps right back. It's like Coulson is down, and then starts giving off more commands and stuff like that. So it plays well, and I think in the moment nobody can really breathe. You need to set that grieving moment for a little bit later.
Well, and it does kind of move into, as we cut to the two shot of the two of them as the medical staff arrives to check on him, it goes into a little bit of a slow-mo. We're probably like, I don't know, just slightly slower as he kind of stands and backs up to give them space. But you can see as he looks at them, I mean, he's not like, tears pouring down his face or anything, but you can see that his eye is a little more watery. Like clearly there is some this is hitting him, and he backs up and kind of leans on the railing, and it's just a moment where it feels like he has lost a comrade in arms, and you definitely get this weight from his character. I think that Samuel L. Jackson plays this moment, with how you would need to play a person in a leadership position, but who is just taking a brief moment, the briefest of moments, just to recognize this sad moment here. I think it's quite nice.
Yeah, I I think anytime you get some of our favorite characters mourning one of our other favorite characters, it's like the lowest of the low hanging fruit. So I'm ready to. I'm already ready to feel with all these people, but I think this minute and in particular, I think the next minute too, where we actually get to do the round robin of all of the other Avengers mourning the loss of Coulson. I think it's actually handled well, albeit briefly. Like this really is the artifact of the movie by minute process, that it feels like it's a slow churn when we're talking for a half hour about this 1 minute of mourning and another, tomorrow. But the truth is the movie snaps back quickly. And so to use this bit, this 60 seconds, 120 seconds of emotion to fuel the next hour of film, I think is pretty efficient filmmaking. And, it's pretty expertly, included here, not saccharine, not sappy, but appropriate for the level of loss.
I would agree with that. I think that it's dwelled on just enough that we can feel it, that we get a little bit of a sense of closure, but then there's still a war happening, so we need to just jump right back into that. And it's, yeah, exactly.
And we do get little moments like we see Hill's reaction as she's being taken care of, and then kind of pushes the medical person away as she hears the news. And I always think it's interesting, the moment when we cut to Natasha. Now we get very little of this. We'll talk about this a little bit more in tomorrow's minute. But as we're looking at Natasha as she's hearing the news, we're also seeing the S.H.I.E.L.D. officers taking the unconscious Clint away. And so there's an additional layer that we're getting with her, because on top of the fact that Coulson has been lost, she's unsure at this point. Like, is Clint going to wake up knowing who he is, or is he still going to be trying to kill her? Who knows? So I think that's an interesting last little beat that we have here of this minute. So good minute. Good stuff.
Good minute.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's about it for today. So let's wrap it up. Curtis, thank you again so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate you being here to talk about this with us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, and we'll have to see if I can get on for the next movie as well. That'll be fun.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tell everybody again one more time about your show and where they can track it down.
Sure. My podcast is called the Epic Marvel Podcast. You can find it at epicmarvelpodcast.com. It's a podcast where we just talk about old Marvel comics, and in particular, ones that are collected in the series of trade paperbacks that Marvel produces called the Epic Collections. And I love the Epic Collections. I think they're just a great way to read about Marvel's history. And in fact, I have a Facebook group devoted to them if you just search for Epic Collections on Facebook. And you can also find me on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. I'm all over the place. You just got to search for either my name, Curtis with a K, or Epic Marvel Podcast.
Fantastic. Well, the link's in the show notes, everybody. And remember, if you don't see the show notes in your podcatcher, you can just go to our website, marvelmovieminute.com. And there you can also learn about our memberships, where you can get extra episodes, early episodes, ad-free episodes, all that good stuff. That is it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with another guest. I believe tomorrow we have Lachlan Teal coming on to talk with us about Minute 90. So that's it. We'll be back tomorrow. Pete, thanks as always.
That's right, Andy. Tomorrow, Cap gets bloody.
Oh, bloody, bloody. Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Message to the World by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.